HPPodcraft.com.
I think that both of us simultaneously cried out in mixed awe, wonder, terror, and disbelief in our own senses as we finally cleared the pass and saw what lay beyond. The effect of the monstrous sight was indescribable, for some fiendish violation of known natural law seemed certain at the outset. Here, on a hellishly ancient tableland fully 20,000 feet high, there stretched nearly to vision's limit a tangle of orderly stone which only the desperation of mental self-defense could possibly attribute to any but a conscious and artificial cause.
That was the first paragraph of H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. I am Chris Lackey.
I'm Chad Fifer.
And I'm Ian Culbard.
And we are on the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
Here at HPPodcraft.com. Glad to have you back, Ian.
And I'm glad to be back.
This is our fourth episode of At the Mountains of Madness. I'll also mention that it is our 80th episode. And
80?
80 episodes of this show, if you don't count the readings,
right, yeah.
so far. And the really great thing about this episode is that we're here in Santa Monica, and Chris is actually in the room with me right now.
Oh my God, I am.
Yeah.
I didn't realize
You're surprised by that?
Yeah. Things seemed a little different, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Well, you know, we the first half, I guess probably almost up to the first 40 episodes we did do in your apartment about a block away from here.
Yep.
And then Chris moved to England, and we've been doing it over Skype, but Chris is on his way through because your brother's getting married, right?
He is. My brother, Pat, he's going to get married this weekend.
So, he skipped through town here in Los Angeles, and we decided, let's sit down together and do this again.
Yeah.
What does it feel like to look at me again?
It's creepy. I'm a little uncomfortable.
Oh,
well, the thing is,
I thought you were going to say, like, it feels good or something
No,
nice.
no. Well, I mean, when we first did our recording, you wore clothes. And now that you gotten into this habit of yours, I think it is, well, just a little uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, sure.
Obviously very comfortable for you.
I love it. By the way, Ian, what are you wearing?
What am I wearing? I'm not telling you that.
All right.
All right.
I just pictured him in a tutu and a Viking helmet.
Oh, for me it was formal wear.
Yeah.
How did you know?
So what's going on in the story thus far?
There's an expedition that's gone down to the Arctic. They are just doing some geological studies, and they stumble upon some fossil evidence that shows that there was a complex life form that existed hundreds of millions of years ago before any big complex life forms should exist. So they changed their study over to this different area, and they split up the group. The guy that's the head of the expedition, Dreyer, stayed back.
It's not Dreyer, it's Dyer.
I can't get Fred Dreyer out of my head.
Oh, so it's Antarctic. Didn't you say Arctic? I think you said Arctic.
Did I say Arctic?
Yeah, it's the other side of the planet.
Antarctic.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Antarctic.
Is it different if you say Arctic?
Yeah. Arctic is the north. Antarctic
really?
is the south. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew that the whole time.
So they split up. This guy, Lake, who's a biologist, they find some bodies of these weird creatures, and they start to dissect them, and then all of a sudden they lose communications. Then Dyer goes up to find out what happened, and they're all killed. One dude's missing, Gendy, and and one of the dogs. And Dyer and his sidekick, Danforth, have decided to go up into those mountains to see, what the heck's going on up there.
They want to confirm what they've been hearing from reports from Lake. Now, all those people were missing, and when they showed up at the camp, those guys have been massacred. So, yeah, you're right. Dyer and Danforth, they go up over, and that opening quote that we heard is them flying up over those mountains of madness that had been reported to them over the telegraph. And just want to mention real quick that, again, we have Joe Fria as our reader. We have Reber Clark doing our music. And we're grateful to have them once again.
I do want to bring up something about that opening quote. Lovecraft he read a bunch of Freud stuff, and that line that he has about a tangle of orderly stone which only the desperation of mental self-defense could possibly attribute to any but a conscious and artificial cause.
Sure.
Lovecraft wrote in one of his letters, because this is after reading some Freud, he says, Dr. Sigmund Freud of Vienna, whose system of psychoanalysis I have begun to investigate, would probably prove the end of idealistic thought. I think he has his limitations, and I am inclined to accept the modifications of Adler, who, in placing the ego above the eros, makes a scientific return to the position which Nietzsche assumed for wholly philosophical reasons.
Okay.
Which ties in, it's Lovecraft's sort of world view of when people see things they can't deal with, they sort of retreat into this insanity. People see something they can't deal with and they just go nuts, or they edit out their memory, which is based in some scientific principles. And of course, Lovecraft was reading Freud and taking that stuff and putting it into his stories. But it seems really unique where most times in horror stories or fiction, people just scream or they run, or and that's it. That's the extent of fear. But in here, it's a much deeper psychological trauma.
It is the desperation of mental self-defense.
Yeah.
What a great phrase that is, Because how many times in your life, and I'm sure anybody listening has seen something and they said, that didn't just happen. It must have been something else.
Right.
You kind of naturally correlate to something that you would understand as well, wouldn't you? You have various, if you believe them or not, UFO sightings, alien sightings, and they tend to correlate that it's like an owl man and things like that, because they'll just say, oh, it kind of looks like an owl.
Or wait, wasn't there a monkey man with robot arms in India?
Oh, yeah.
That's the one. And you tend to rationalize and correlate things, you'll put together in your mind exactly what you do understand, and anything,
Well, I remember one time I was on Hollywood Boulevard with Chris about 15 years ago when we were driving, and there was a guy just wearing a cap.
Oh, yeah.
And shoes.
Red cap, red shoes, and nothing else.
Yeah. And immediately I thought, well, something happened where his clothes just fell off, or I tried to figure out. My self-defense, my mental self-defense kicked in. He didn't do that intentionally. There's no reason he could have possibly done that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Something happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're thinking, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'm left with the frightening notion that he woke up that day and said, cap and shoes, that's it. All right, so once they cross over these mountains, Danforth and Dyer, they see what lies below. They have to rule out any natural erosion. I mean, this is undoubtedly a city of some kind that they see, right? It predates everything known to modern science and geology. And it's sort of the realization of the earlier polar mirage, right? They had seen this polar mirage where they thought this is they saw something and they thought that can only be a mirage because this can't possibly exist over those mountains.
But it was real.
But it was. They're seeing it. There are cones, there's cave mouths, there's cubes, giant buildings. Now it's eroded, but it's obvious that this is once a city. Sort of like if you see the ruins of Pompeii or something like that, where yes, it's sort of shaved down by wind and time, but it's clearly it was a structure of some kind. And there's some bridges or something like that, right? There's bridges that cross over, and they could tell from the shape of things that there was once some sort of great river running through the whole thing millions of years ago. And the really once again we get into scale with this story, that they're flying around looking at this city, and it goes on and on and on and on and on, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just huge. But I mean, and also at this point too, he again brings up the Plateau of Lang and compares it to that, and talks about Hyperborean legends.
Hyperborea, yeah.
Isn't that a Conan thing?
It is Conan, but I don't know where it came from. Who? Oh, nope, I knew. Clark Ashton Smith.
Yeah,
it was in my notes here.
Hyperborea is Greek myth, in that context. But I mean, in the context of the pulps, I would presume that he's referring to what Robert E. Howard would have been referring to, possibly.
Right. Well, specifically, Clark Ashton Smith was the one that came up with it, or used it first, as the northern continent. So kind of Europe before it was Europe.
Some of those first Conan stories are referred to as the Hyperborean age.
And it just means beyond the Boreas.
You're like a code breaker. Well, there are open spaces as they fly over the city that have that same star shape that was used on the soapstone and in the graves for the elder things. And they do finally, at some point in the plane, they reach the end of it, the end of the city. So it is finite. And then they turn back and they decide we got to find a place to land so we can explore this on foot, right?
Yeah.
And so they do. They find like a nice stretch where they say, this is a safe place. It's pretty flat. We can land here with the plane.
And more importantly, take off later.
Exactly. This is somewhere we can take off from. And what was tripping me out when I was reading that part of the story is when they land the plane, they get out of the plane and they take off some clothes because while they were flying, open air in that plane, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't even believe that.
No.
Because you're already in the most freezing part of the planet, and on top of that, you're flying in a plane at really fast speeds.
At super
Yeah.
high altitudes.
And at altitudes that would have caused irreparable damage, probably, yeah.
Well, I mean, that was one thing I was thinking about the story. And people, when they climb Everest, they need oxygen. And this is higher than Everest. So how is it possible? Well, I mean, there's sort of an explanation later on in the story of there's mist coming up.
Uh-huh.
So I
it's
think
oxygenated in
maybe,
some way,
I'm assuming, or maybe Lovecraft just didn't really understand that you need oxygen at that point.
Also, very early on in the story, we're told that Peabody, which is how I'm choosing to pronounce it now, Peabody did something with the fuel. He made it so it wouldn't freeze. Essentially, he invented antifreeze, didn't he?
Also, lots of cocaine.
Yeah.
Cocaine!
That's my subtext. They get out of the plane once they land, and they decide we're going to start doing some exploring on foot. They gather up their supplies. They've got paper and pens and flashlights and extra batteries. Now, normally if you were going to track your path through something, he says you'd take your geologist hammer and chisel and you'd kind of carve into the wall. But they have extra paper, so they decide they're going to use that.
Yeah.
Aside from doing their sketches and notes, they're going to use a little bit of paper for trailblazing.
Yeah.
I found that odd. It's like leaving breadcrumbs.
Yeah, essentially, it's Hansel and Gretel, isn't it? Those crumbs are going to disappear.
Where do you put the paper? I didn't understand this, and maybe I'm just dense or something.
No.
But what are you tucking it into the ground? I mean, how do you keep
don't
the
know.
paper from blowing away?
Well, and it's also white. Paper's generally white, and snow is white, so it would be really easy to lose.
There's something here that we're missing, because I'm sure that Lovecraft would have not researched the whole Antarctic expedition thing and then just gone, paper, they use paper.
Yeah, I don't know.
There must be some precedent for that. So they see this rampart. It's this giant, kind of star-shaped, series of walls, and when they touch it, it's very profound. They know they're touching something that hasn't been...
No human has ever touched it.
Yeah, and no thing of any kind has touched it for millions
of years.
It's shaped like a star. It's 300 feet tall, and there are little windows and loopholes in it. Yeah. And they climb through one of the windows, but everything's all ice-choked. They can't really get through anywhere at that point. So they go down a ramp of some kind or something like that. They walk down to the city itself.
Because the theory being that it'll be less ice-choked the further down they go. I think that's in correlation with they're working their way towards the river.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things too that they talk about is that the stones are made of are huge. They're 6 feet by 8 feet the surface of these things, and they don't know exactly how deep they go. But whatever made these things, they either had to have some crazy technology to move these stones, or
really efficient slaves of some kind.
Yeah.
And this is the point where they regret not bringing Peabody with them, so that he could have come up with some sort of idea of how they engineered this.
Yeah.
It must be very frustrating when you go down there and you go, I wish I knew what was at play here, because this stuff doesn't make any sense to me, and all I know is the age of rocks and what rocks are made of.
Yeah.
I feel like that about this podcast sometimes. Like I wish somebody that knew what they're talking about was here, because all I really know about is fish sticks.
And even then, I don't know how they're made. I just know that you put them in the oven and they're delicious.
Yeah, exactly.
I ate 100 of them in college, by the way.
Oh, right. I remember.
Yeah.
Do you know, I keep having these moments where I keep okay, you're 80 shows in, and I keep forgetting to join in because I keep thinking I'm listening to the show.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a
I'm
good
sitting
thing.
there going, oh, God, yeah, I'm actually part of this. Right now.
We were talking to one of our friends, Levi, yesterday, and he said, yeah, I listened to your show and it's pretty good, but then I keep chiming in while you guys are talking, and then I remember I'm not having a conversation with you, and then I just shut it off. So they walk down to the city itself, and they're taking photos. They're trying not to freak out because everything's blowing them away. And it says,
Even the pictures illustrate only one or two phases of its infinite bizarrerie, endless variety, preternatural massiveness, and utterly alien exoticism. There were geometrical forms for which a Euclid could scarcely find a name, cones of all degrees of irregularity and truncation, terraces of every sort of provocative disproportion, shafts with odd bulbous enlargements, broken columns in curious groups, and 5-pointed or 5-ridged arrangements of mad grotesqueness. As we drew nearer, we could see beneath certain transparent parts of the ice sheet and detect some of the tubular stone bridges that connected the crazily sprinkled structures of various heights. Of orderly streets there seemed to be none, the only broad open swath being a mile to the left, where the ancient river had doubtless flowed through the town into the mountains.
It's just a thought, this, but we were talking about, people rationalizing and, getting something that they know and relating it to that and stuff. And as they're walking around, I think when I originally designed the city for the graphic novel, one of my first thoughts was to go really alien with it. And I was going to base it on the Mandelbrot set, which is like a fractal. And and it goes off, and you get it in crystals, and you can get it in vegetables, I believe.
And what you mean by that is like a fractal, like it repeats itself continually
within a pattern, within a pattern, and within a pattern. It keeps going.
Exactly.
So it gives that sort of illusion of the infinite. And within a computer program, I believe it is infinite, the idea that it just keeps going and going and going. But it was very quickly that I realized while we were reading these things, there are familiarities as they're going around. And I think it becomes, it's a point that will come up later on in the story as to why those things are very familiar to them. Why
they can look at this architecture and there's something almost from a evolutionary standpoint. It makes sense to them. We're connected to this somehow. It's not completely alien.
No, not totally alien. Not totally alien, like, say, something like Relia. I'll say Relia because I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but I always say Relia because it sounds like hell yeah. But I think that whereas when you get Relia, that is completely, you get non-Euclidean geometry holds the whole thing up. So that is completely beyond our comprehension. In contrast, this city there are familiarities. You're walking around and hey, hang on, this looks a bit like, and he's able to say there's streets and there's balconies and terraces.
In fact, at one point he says they find some petrified wood shutters.
Yes, with hinges.
Which sounded more like New England or something like that to me than ancient.
Well, to me, and to me that sounded like Tuscany or something like that,
or Home Depot. I'm going to go get some shutters later today.
Oh, to us it would be IKEA, but
Right. Ancient IKEA. IKEA sounds kind of Lovecraftian when you think about it.
And it'll explain why the city's abandoned now, because
everything fell apart very easily.
They had bits missing, and every time he moved the furniture, it fell apart.
They lost the knowledge of where the Allen wrenches were over time. They couldn't put things together anymore.
Which is why you have that star shape on everything.
They get to the town. I like this. It says Danforth began making some offensively irrelevant speculations about the horror at the camp. He insisted he saw faint traces of ground markings, which he did not like, whilst elsewhere he stopped to listen to a subtle imaginary sound from some undefined point of muffled musical piping, he said.
Yeah. And they bring that up a lot, where they talk about the wind howling and they hear this piping, kind of the wind. When wind sometimes will pick up, it'll kind of go, but...
Don't do that, Chris, please.
No?
No, that scared me. You didn't need to imitate it. It's fine to talk about it, but not in my presence.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I don't remember what I was talking about. So
it's one of the things, and we haven't brought it up yet, but they do refer to that musical piping that seems to be coming. Lovecraft's got a flute thing going on. It's often there's something about woodwinds and the sound of air passing through a cylinder that bothers him and
creeps him out. Well, he has the piping with the Azathoth in the middle of the universe. The pipers, he's dancing mindlessly, to the piping music, and there's a through line with that in Lovecraft. He's scared of pipes, I guess.
Well, he heard Zamfir. Clearly the language of the Elder Things had to do with musical notes in a way or something like that. It's something that we can't understand. And the environment sounds like that too. So the environment and the history, it's all one and the same. The language is still being spoken whether they're alive or dead. Mm-hmm. I wish that we could get Danforth's actual dialogue, because I want to know what his offensively irrelevant speculations are. I want to hear them.
How could he be offended by it? He must be really...
Well, Danforth, I think, is nailing it. He's going, look, guys, here's what's really going on. Clearly, those winged barrel thing killed everybody at the camp.
Yep.
And we're about to see some stuff, and it's going to make us insane forever. And they keep going, that's offensive. This is going to be science and reasonable, and it's not going to be anything like that. He's like, no, we're going to see giant penguins. No, we are not.
Don't be ridiculous.
Sir, you offend me with your speculation.
Well, they finally find an archway 6 feet wide, 10 feet high, and it's pretty much the opening they want because it marks the end of a bridge, and they figure out through this they can gain entrance to a sort of building. Mm-hmm. And that gets us into chapter 6.
It would be cumbrous to give a detailed, consecutive account of our wanderings inside that cavernous, eon-dead honeycomb of primal masonry, that monstrous layer of elder secrets which now echoed for the first time, after uncounted epochs, to the tread of human feet. This is especially true because so much of the horrible drama and revelation came from a mere study of the omnipresent mural carvings.
It would be cumbrous.
It would be. Well, I mean...
Got news for you. It's already cumbrous.
But, you know, obviously you can go nuts because it's a completely alien city. So, you know, just describing each building must be weird and different in some extraordinary way. Now, this part of the story, we're getting into... I've heard a lot of complaints about how Lovecraft has these characters looking at these murals and they are getting all this really detailed, specific information from an alien language.
Yeah.
And how would they understand these things? How would they get this? But my counter to that is, this is after the fact that the story is being told. They could have been looking at these and not really understanding what was going on at the time.
And they have photos.
So they take all these things back and have looked at them and studied them and pieces this together.
Or there's another possibility is that essentially there's a line where he says something along the lines of to the highest artistic degree or whatever it is. The Danforth Dyer says that they were executed and they were brilliant and they were amazing and it could be that they were just incredibly clear. It could be that they, especially given as he's got the groundwork here because he's actually read the Necronomicon. So, because they all have, it was the book they've all handed around. But it could be that he's essentially looked at these things and gone, oh yeah, oh look, there's Cthulhu.
But also, and I really feel that you can learn a lot from the art of a culture. But look, this appeared before in the Nameless City, where they walked down a corridor and there were hieroglyphics on the wall, and they learned a whole story. And it didn't seem very credible to me when I read that story. Mm-hmm. But here, he's very careful to point out there are maps. There are one of the buildings they walk into is an educational building.
Yeah, it's a university.
It's a university of some kind, so it's very clearly spelled out. And you can watch a silent film, and it's a series of images, and what's going on and what happened is very clear to you. And as an illustrator, Ian, you must deal with that all the time. How can I tell a story in 5 images or 6 images? Yeah.
But also, you can have that. Like if you consider it in terms of ancient hieroglyphics, they were pretty straightforward. If you have that basic understanding of ancient hieroglyphics, you're able to decipher the basic concept of what you're looking at. Mm-hmm. If you look at cuneiform writing, if you look at something like Japanese writing, and you have essentially pictures in terms of words. So you're looking at things like a mountain, a picture of a mountain. So you're able to understand that's basically they're talking about a mountain. And then the next one, you look at the next block, and you're looking at a man. So it's a mountain in relation to a man, and so forth. So I think that it's far-fetched, but essentially he does go in there as someone a bit more forearmed than anybody else.
And also, he's not saying, and then there was President Chthonian, and then there was Emperor. I mean, then nobody's got dialogue or anything. There was a war, and then the war ended, and then this happened, and I can totally see that. It didn't bother me that much.
No.
I didn't think it was that big of a leap. So anyhow, they've entered this building. It's huge, and it's confusing to get around in due to its weirdness, despite the fact that there are very familiar classical structures there, Greek columns and that kind of thing, I imagine. It's also... Well, I did like that it's wheelchair accessible. Because everything's ramps, right? They have no stairs.
Right.
So this was definitely
it's all ramps, isn't it?
It's all ramps, yeah. This was a very kind and well-adapted civilization. Yeah. The art is very well developed. It's alien, but it's clearly based on some kind of principles. It's likely that there are things in the art that they aren't perceiving right. He knows enough to say, we don't have the sensitivities to react to some things I can see in this art that we should be reacting to.
Yeah.
Right? He recognizes that there's a sense I don't have, that if I did have, I would probably get more out of this.
Yeah.
3D glasses.
Yeah, that's exactly what he's talking about.
He doesn't have 3D glasses.
Right, okay. I know, that's a really good point.
Some of the strategy of this story doesn't make a lot of sense to me. He says, I don't want to reveal too much because I don't want people to go here, but here's some awesome stuff that we were looking at. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like if he really wanted to discourage the Starkweather Barrymore,
Yeah.
expedition, he would say,
There's nothing there.
we went down there, there's nothing, it was just a bunch of diapers.
Yeah, it's rubbish. There's nothing there. It all fell apart. There's a McDonald's.
Exactly. There's yeah, it's a really bad wax museum down there.
Yeah.
You know, the Hall of Presidents ends with Jimmy Carter. The last celebrity they have there is Ethel Merman. You know, it's just it's not good. Why is he giving so much detail? It's the worst way to discourage somebody. All I want to do is go.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I'd go on a cruise ship. Norwegian Cruise Lines, take me.
Yeah, I would go.
I don't care what danger there is. I just want to see
Even
it.
if there's Shoggoths, I would still go.
Yeah. Who doesn't want to see a Shoggoth?
Yeah, I know. I'm sure it would blow my mind. It'd probably kill me, but I still, hey,
Yeah.
what a way to go.
TV's boring. Well, one thing I like is they have good heating systems. You know, that they learn about that kind of stuff cracks me up. But it's like they have really good heating.
That's a mark of civilization, though. Plumbing is a really important part of, being civilized.
It is.
I mean, I'd love it if he'd had the detail they had toilets indoors, and that would have been great.
Yeah. Movable things are gone, right? Like things that, sort of like a tornado's coming, it seems like some things are missing, as if they deliberately deserted the city.
Yeah.
Am I reading that wrong? That's
No,
what
they just said
they
that, but
left.
They left in a
There's a
hurry.
lot of litter.
So much so that some of the shutters are closed and some aren't.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real hurry.
Yeah.
I'd hate to be the guy on that day that was in charge of closing the shutters, because clearly he didn't get out.
No.
They find a lot of ovens that are on still, 375 degrees. They've been preheating for millions of years.
But it tastes nice.
Yeah. Oh, man, put some garlic bread in there?
Yeah.
Are you kidding? Delicious. Finally, these guys accept that these were the age-old, great old ones.
Yeah.
The things once rearing and dwelling in this frightful masonry in the age of dinosaurs were not indeed dinosaurs, but far worse. Mere dinosaurs were new and almost brainless objects, but the builders of this city were wise and old, and had left certain traces in rocks even then laid down well nigh 1,000 million years. They were the makers and enslavers of that life, and above all doubt, the originals of the fiendish elder myths, which things like the Nicotic manuscripts and the Necronomicon affrightedly hint about. They were the great old ones that had filtered down from the stars when the earth was young. The beings whose substance and alien evolution had shaped, and whose powers were such as this planet had never bred.
And that's just such an awesome paragraph.
It really is. And you know, the word picture of they had filtered down from the stars,
Yeah.
I've always been impressed by. That means there were some other nasty things that didn't get through or something, you know?
Well, the way I pictured it feels like it's almost like snow, where they, have to come through the atmosphere, and it doesn't come through in a big wave. It's just kind of
Yeah.
sort of a dusting of these
Yeah.
creatures.
Well, they just flew through space. They were going to hit any planet they could get to. We got these ones, but there are other worse things that we don't even know about.
It's interesting because they start. I mean, he refers to them as the old ones, and from here on to the rest of the story, they're the old ones. They're not called elder things anymore.
Well,
Yeah.
Lake was the one who named them the Elder Things, referred to them the Elder Things, and I think it's literally just after that when Dyer's narration picks up, and he makes reference to that. That essentially it begins to change to old things or older things, or
Old ones.
and then it becomes old ones, and then it stays that way for the rest of the story.
Well, after they have this revelation, they need to stop for a moment and recuperate. They do this a couple times during their journey through here, documenting things. And I just wonder how that goes, you know? Your mind gets blown, do you take a nap?
I think solitaire. Play some solitaire.
Play Salt?
Yeah.
Play Minesweeper?
But aren't they racing against the light on this as well?
Well, you're right, they are. It says, were it not the support of those flashlights, soon to be made public, and the batteries are running out, so they are racing a little bit. They have to get things done in a sort of orderly fashion. I did find that sentence odd, those flashlights soon to be made public, so I'm no flashlight historian. In the 20s, they, or rather...
1931, I think. This is a 31, I can't remember now.
So folks in 31 didn't have a flashlight on top of their icebox, still using lanterns? I mean, what's the history there? I don't know.
I'm not sure either. Were flashlights or torches, as the UK people
electric
call them.
torches, right?
Yeah, call them. When did they become? Anybody know when they became popular use? Is that what he's referring to? That they had flashlights, but they were sort of high tech at the time, and most people didn't have them.
Yeah.
Is that what he's trying to say? In that,
I think so. It wasn't it wasn't made public yet, right? So, guys who were going on an expedition that had the sweet planes and everything they needed could get some flashlights, but you're a regular guy, no flashlight.
Well, police officers in the 1890s in the UK used to have them kind of like mining helmets. I'm pretty sure.
It was built into their wigs. When you were drawing them, though, what did they look like?
Well, I had to cheat because essentially I took it to be that, for example, the outfits that they were wearing. They were wearing outfits that would be used in the Antarctic in World War II. So what I did was I kind of dressed them up that way because I sort of thought they get all this cheap gear because they're trying it out.
Yeah. Right. Oh, I see. Okay. So everything they have was kind of forward-looking. Yeah,
and I used a flashlight from the period, but even if it was just a little bit further forward, that's fine because it could be a test piece. Yeah. So, but I'm trying to remember.
You know, they had. I'm gonna step back. I just remembered some of my flashlight history that I had.
You did?
Yeah, because when I was working on Whisper in Darkness, Andrew and I were going through catalogs.
1899.
What?
They're as early as 1899.
Yeah, everybody had flashlights. I don't know what that's talking about because they were in the Sears catalog. I remember seeing them in a 1930. Whisper was 1931 Sears catalog.
All right, so they're in the catalog. That's when they were made public. Basically, Lovecraft was...
That makes no sense.
He was doing a promo. Soon available at Sears.
But even in 1899, the flashlight looked like a flashlight. It was like a cylinder object, and it was handheld. So
we had a vintage flashlight when we did Whisper in Darkness. That was from 1931. It was in the Sears catalog. I know. Yeah.
Here's the thing that worries me all the time. Natural disaster strikes. God forbid. I don't know how to build a flashlight.
Oh yeah, no.
All the things I rely on day to day, I couldn't.
You don't have a.
No, you have to use an axe.
How would you build a light bulb?
I use an axe.
If civilization went to hell, you just learn to use an axe. That's it. That's all you need to survive.
Right.
So forget flashlights. You probably won't even have time to go back and get one. And even then, once you recharge the battery, you're relying on things that everybody else has you can charge it up because someone is working a generator somewhere for you to charge it up.
Yeah.
Whereas when everything is gone, you just need an axe.
I know. Oh, man, I'm in so much trouble. Because I don't even know how to use an axe. Which side is it that you put against an invader?
Sorry?
It's the thin part, right?
Chad, you're hopeless.
That's it, yeah.
All right, well, with that, I think we should end this episode. I hope that I'm not going to be pillaged by people now that I've revealed my ignorance of how to use technology. It does say at the end of chapter, what are we on there, 6? We just finished up. It says, I still wonder that we deduced so much in the short time at our disposal. Of course, we even now only have the barest outline. So again, he's calling attention to the fact, it's credible that we learned this much.
Yeah.
Don't hate on me so much.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's good. Well, we're going to get into chapter 7 next. Ian, will you come back next week? And
Yes.
Great.
That was already a firm yes.
I know.
Yeah.
Now that you want to come so bad, I don't know if we want you.
No, we do. We will.
Oh, man. I should have teased it out.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, Chad.
All right, we'll be back then. I want to thank Joe Fria for doing our readings.
I want to thank Reber Clark for the kick-ass music.
I want to thank Mike Mann for giving us a great site and keeping up with the tech side of things.
And I want to thank Brooke Burgess for being an awesome intern and doing our notes.
We'll be back next week with more Mountains of Madness. I am Chad Fifer.
I'm Chris Lackey.
And I'm Ian Culbard.
And this has been the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
At HPPodcraft.com.
HPPodcraft.com.